Thing.
Here.
Cool. Looks like we're recording. Yeah. So hey, Mike, how you doing?
Good. How's it going, Joe? Nice to see you.
Yeah, good. Thanks for speaking to us during lockdown, and yeah, it's nice to. So we did our podcast a little while ago before lockdown in person, but we didn't record any video. So it was a good time to get back in touch and do this sort of Skype call so people can see who they're talking about. And I love how you've got some of your things on the wall behind you.
There we go. Yeah, we're putting a face to a voice. I'm sorry to disappoint everybody, but this is what I'm feeling.
Yeah. It's a great face, mate. Don't ever doubt that. Yeah, is that part of your orc costume, these bone sword?
Yeah. So the these are like butter replicas, and then that's the bone sword. So it's supposed to be like a dark Eldar wraithbone sword. So they like psychically grown bone. But this one basically what it does is it touches you and it basically instantly sucks all the liquid out of you, so it desiccates you instantly. So it's called the husk blade. So what I'm gonna do is the blade is gonna be like new wet, almost semi-translucent bird bone sort of texture. And then as it works its way down the blade, it's gonna start like cracking and aging and stuff like that. So by like the end, it's all like white and cracked and stuff like that.
Awesome, mate. Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah, so I remember this really good interview. We sort of go through all of your career and so the only thing since then, like I think we were still at Weta when we did that, right? And you've since then, you've been working on exciting new projects up in Amazon, up in Auckland, right?
Yeah. Just someone referred to me a while back as a prop gypsy, and like I'm really living that lifestyle. I think you and I can both relate to that somewhat.
Totally, man.
Yeah, I was in Beijing for 6 weeks over the holidays. Got out like just as they were closing the border. And then came up to Auckland. I was working on an untitled Amazon project for 2.5 months, I think. And I'm heading up to 3D printer and props now. Just been doing that until lockdown, and now I've been basically studying and learning Arduino and programming and all that sort of fun stuff. Like I really want to bring like kind of like a higher end professional animatronic aspect to my props, because like in the past I would have a dumb block with like a hollow in the middle, and I'd throw some batteries and some LEDs inside, and like that would be the extent of it. Whereas this has like 4 or 5 moving parts, and basically what I did is I put it all like in my 3D model. I put all the components and all the moving kind of armature in first, and then built the shell of the gun around it. They all have like little alignment pegs and stuff like that that can hold everything on the inside. So it's a completely new way of like tackling a build, but it's hopefully going to push me to learn some new stuff and programming LEDs and servos.
Wicked, mate. Yeah, that'd be great. You'll have to send us some pictures so I can put them with the audio, because people won't have things to look at when that's going on. And yeah, it'd be cool. Any photos you've got. Yeah. But we'll let people listen to the audio, and thank you for speaking to us, and good luck with the lockdown. And
Stay safe and happy and sane, everyone.
Yeah, nice one. All right, thanks, Mike. Bye.
No worries.
Cool. So, welcome to the next episode of the Uncredited podcast. Today we've got Mike Cameron, who's my good friend from Weta. Mike, would you like to start telling us a little bit about your story?
So, I guess like the origins of kind of like where I got to where I am today is I was an industrial designer, and I really liked kind of like the engineering side of things and the creativity, and in school they were kind of like, through design you can change the world, and then you get out into the industry and it's like there's very little real design process involved, and it's all about capitalism and profit margins and stuff like that, and it's like that's the reality of kind of the transition from school to the real industry. Is there's the pros and cons. But
So we should say you're from Canada originally, right?
Yes,
And
yes.
we're now both living in New Zealand. But
Yes.
so what course did you do in Canada then?
So I was industrial design. And yeah, like there was definitely some challenges and some learning experience, and like I definitely benefited from it, but it wasn't. I didn't feel fulfilled, and it's like as a creative, if you're not fulfilled, then you're not doing your best work because you're not engaged in the way you should be. And the reality is that you need to make money as a creative, and so I was kind of like, well, if I'm destined to be a horde of capitalism essentially, I'd rather be building giant laser rifles than chairs and tables.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. So
So that's why you're aware. That's why.
yeah, exactly. You know,
Film
and
industry.
so I like it took several years, and like I was building up a portfolio in my spare time and stuff like that, and like I really didn't like I wasn't making headway in Toronto. And then I ended up moving to Australia for unrelated reasons, and I got a job in Melbourne doing lighting design again. So kind of like doing the same stuff as I was back home. And then I just randomly met a guy at a cosplay convention, and he had worked on The Matrix and Star Wars, and he kind of said, "Oh, call my guy in Sydney," and he got me a job on Alien Covenant doing props. And it really was kind of like a perfect storm of like the luck and then also the work getting ready so that you're ready for that lucky break when it comes along, you know, because a lot of people are like, oh, I'm so envious, blah blah blah, but it's like, you know, when people were out drinking on Friday nights, I was at home making plasma rifles and stuff, you know, so you need to be ready for that opportunity when it comes along, I think.
So you already had you'd been developing it as a hobby, and also with your industrial design background, you know, was doing that as a career. But so those two pieces came together and went into film.
Exactly. Like we were already taught model making and prototyping and stuff like that. So it's kind of like it was a very, it was a nice transition between the two because it's like the skill sets were mainly the same, and it was just about kind of refining them and getting all your different materials and your finishing to a higher level and stuff like that. But you know, like the school definitely gave me a good start on that, and I think that's why there are so many industrial designers working in the film industry now.
Yeah, especially at Weta, that's the sort of main course there that they run at Massey University. I think that leads a lot of people into it.
Definitely.
So in Australia, that would have been exciting then, getting your first job over there.
Oh yeah, and it was like I literally like dropped everything in Melbourne, and I went to Sydney like the very next day. We worked there for 12 weeks. I was pulling like 90-hour weeks and like living in like a hostel down the street and basically just like, you know, working and sleeping for that entire time. But it's like, you know, you kind of get a high from the industry, so it's like, you know, when it's going that fast, you're engaged and you're enjoying it, and you know at the end of it you're kind of exhausted, but it's like it's a good exhaustion. You know, you feel like you're actually like creating something, and there's a certain amount of legacy, and like regardless of how the movie is received or how well it does when it actually gets to, you know, to box office, it's like you can still look at your part and be proud of what you did and stuff like that. And you know, it's part of the Alien franchise. Like that's a storied franchise. You know?
And it's such a cool world to be a part of. So what did you make for that?
I did a lot of the control panels on the Covenant and also on the dropship. So it was a lot of kind of like, you know, what you yourself has been doing.
Yeah, and the control panels as well.
Yep.
So I've been
Yeah, a lot of control panels. Yeah, and then just kind of like random little bits and pieces. Like we worked on like the organic holders for like the bioweapon stuff that turns people into you know ash basically, and just like little bits and pieces and stuff. But it was mainly like control panels because again, like the industrial design background, you're trying to make something that looks like a manufactured product, and so you know if you have the eye for that already, it's a very linear transfer of kind of like aesthetic where you can be like, okay, like that looks like something someone built and produced in a manufacturing setting, as opposed to like, you know, no one's making artisanal one-off panels unless you're doing like steampunk and stuff like that, you know.
100%. It's one of those things that sells the world, and people don't think about how much of that is necessary for a sci-fi film. You know, that basically you're not in a spaceship unless you're, you know, surrounded by technology, and control panels is one of those aspects of that technology that sells that world. And there's an underrated amount of work that goes into that sort of stuff.
Oh, for sure.
and yeah, Uncredited works. So there we go.
Yeah.
What was your next film project after that?
I was on Thor Ragnarok up in Gold Coast, and we mainly did like the weaponry and stuff like that. So it was a lot of kind of space guns and doomsday weapons and a lot of stuff that wasn't either shown in the movie. A lot of it got cut. Like we worked on this floating golden palanquin that Goldblum's character floats in on, and the concept art looked really good. It was kind of like an upward shot, and he's kind of like he's got his hands behind his back and he's floating down the hallway, and it's like literally like we spent I think 4 weeks with 10 guys building this thing out of fiberglass, and it had a steel support so they could actually like cantilever him out behind a green screen or in front of a green screen. And it was literally in the movie for about half a second, like they see him from a distance just like step off of it, and that was it. And it's like, but that's the reality of the film industry, right? Is like, you build more than you need, and then you cull as needed, sort of thing, because it's easier to it's more cost effective to do it kind of like on the front end of things and then cut, as opposed to being like, oh well, we don't have enough, and like now we got to like pull the crew back and start building stuff again because we don't have enough content. So I mean, I think that's pretty much the built into the margins and stuff of the budget.
Yeah, of course, and that's why the budget gets so, is required to be so big for these things. And if it's not there, you wouldn't notice. So you would notice, but it's all part of that world building. And that Thor 3 is probably my favorite Marvel movie.
Oh, yeah.
I loved it so much, and Jeff Goldblum's character was so fun.
Yeah, Taika Waititi, you should come on the show.
Yeah. So yeah, that would have been a fun one. So did that lead to other projects after that as well?
Yeah. So then I went back to Sydney and I was on Pacific Rim Uprising in the action vehicles department. That was a real dream position because the team I was working with was the guys that did all the cars for Mad Max Fury Road, and so they were geniuses with metal and they could fabricate up stuff. Like I guess because metal is not like the main part of my background. It's been a lot of like kind of plastics and composites and molding and woodworking and stuff like that. So with me with welding and fabricating steel, I'm kind of like it's a labor intensive, time intensive process. And then I'd be like, okay, like do this angle at this angle and da 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 da. I'd walk away and like 5 minutes later they'd be like, we're done. And it's like, really? Like, holy shit, you guys are impressive, so like really amazing team. But because we were like a satellite location, they didn't have kind of like an internal design department. We were just kind of getting like sketches and stuff from the concept artists, but they were very kind of like sketchy, like hashed lines as opposed to kind of clean panel lines. And it's like, well, we're building vehicles. We need like a resolved drawing of where all the facets are on this vehicle. And they're like, well, can you do it? And I'm like, yeah, sure. So like I ended up taking over kind of the design side of things and coordinating a lot of the builds and doing like laser cutting on all the acrylic and stuff for the like the latches on the doors and stuff like that. And yeah, it was a really fun project. And it's like, regardless of how you feel about the movie, like I liked the trucks, so I'm like, hey, like I did my job.
Yeah, absolutely,
yeah.
and that's a great opportunity for you to step up and learn. And it's a strange thing of organic of who takes responsibility for what sometimes on a film.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
And fair play to you for taking up that. And
well, and availability, right? It's like,
right.
We need this done. Who can do it? And it's like first person to put their hand up that feels like they can confidently pull it off. And that's often how a lot of these things get allocated. Like there's like the main things that are obviously like I want that like high profile concept artist to design like our main like the Jaegers and stuff like that. But it's like all these other little pieces that kind of need to fall into place. It's like, well, like it's what do they say? This is actually like one of the late night show hosts was talking about like politics and stuff like that, and he's like, politics, like the truly skilled are being supplanted by the truly available or something like that, and it's like, yeah, it's like who's on hand and who's like not incompetent, and those are often the people that get the gigs.
Yeah, it's very true. But also, I prefer the phrase who rates you, right? But it also does come back to that contact and knowing and trusting that person. So is that how these three jobs link together as well? Was there people that you'd worked with on all three?
Yeah, it very much rolled one into the next. The Aliens finished up in Sydney, and like there wasn't another production for a couple months, and they were like, well, call your friend, my friend up in Gold Coast, And then so he took me, and then I went back down because the one of the team leaders like was like looking for someone, and then I got suggested, and then it was so like it was perfect because they really like seamlessly rolled one to the next, which is sometimes rare in the industry. Like often you're off for a month or two. I that caused me not to be able to see half the stuff in Australia I wanted to see. I didn't get to go to the Great Barrier Reef or anything like that. But it's like when you're getting your break in the industry, it's like seize the moment, because there might not be another one, and then so that really built up my portfolio enough where I could go back home and kind of break into the movies there. And Toronto is kind of being quite strategic with their planning now, because it's like a lot of times you got to coordinate with governments to bring in these big movies, because they're brought in because of tax rebates and stuff like that. So they've just kind of like scrapped that for the time being, and they're really working on like streaming service movies or streaming service shows and stuff like that, because there's a lot of money and there's a lot of like like the fast turnaround and stuff like that. Like as soon as they get one show out, there's another show coming in. So like it's really a thriving industry in Toronto. So I was able to do that. And yeah, but like at the end of the day, like in the back of my mind, there was still this itch, because it's like District 9 was the movie that inspired me to get into the industry in the first place. And so it was always like Greg Broadmoor and Weta, and like like they were like the titans of the industry. And like I felt like that's really where I needed to be. And so yeah, like came over here. I wasn't guaranteed any sort of an interview or anything like that. I had kind of like secondhand connections through the guys I worked with on Pacific Rim, but they're just like, yeah, I can't promise anything till you're here, sort of thing. So I had to kind of like move my life across the world. I mean, as I'm sure you can relate to, on kind of like a maybe, and then it's like luckily they liked what I did, and I got in, and so I've been working here now a little bit over a year.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, it's especially working abroad. It is a big gamble, but yeah, and there's no guarantees ever with film work. Even if you are, pinned down for a project, who knows? It could change so quickly.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That is the nature of the beast.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's cool. Has there been any particular projects that you have been your favorite so far?
I did like Thor a lot, just because when you're world building, often there's a certain aesthetic. So like if you have like a race that you're kind of building for, or a certain planet or whatever. But with Ragnarok, there was like the gladiatorial pit basically, and so they had all these different guys coming in from all different parts of the universe, and so every day we were working on a different aesthetic. So like one day it might be like this sword is biologically grown from bone, and the next time you might be working on space elves, and then the next is like big chunky mechanical pieces, or like the Hulk's like big blunt weaponry and stuff like that. So it was nice to kind of like flex my muscles on all these different types. That being said, with the advent of 3D printing and kind of that being like the main driver in the industry, like it still was just being like given a couple pieces of 3D printed material and having to kind of like texture and finish it and stuff like that, where I think it would be an even larger challenge if you were doing this analog building, because there are different techniques you would use. But it was still a lot of fun either way, I mean, like just every day coming in and being like, oh, like what are we working on today, and being thrown something and just kind of like rolling with it. And yeah.
Yeah, the look of Thor is fantastic. That's one of my favorite art books, and like you say, also District 9 as well. Another one of my favorite art books. Very inspiring stuff. Yeah. Has there been any less glamorous jobs? So obviously it's
I've been quite lucky in the past couple years, but obviously like when you're first starting out, you kind of take anything. And I think that's kind of like, it's just been in the past year or two where I can like look at the jobs I've been taking and kind of the jobs that I've been saying no to, and I actually feel like I've established myself in the industry enough where I can say no to certain things. But there was a lot of stuff in the past, doing like advertising, sculptural stuff, where like we were doing fabrication for movies and commercials and outdoor advertising and stuff like that. And there was a couple projects that either I got burns because someone didn't pay me, or we were kind of working with bare bones budget, and like you had this great idea and it kept on getting cut down because of time and budgetary constraints and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, it's like I think the advertising design stuff would kind of fall into that kind of paradigm of like when I was building furniture and stuff, where it's kind of like mundane, and it's, you know, you're following a pre-prescribed pathway and stuff, and there's not a lot of room for creative interpretation. Um, Whereas once kind of like I was able to kind of break free of that, you know, I think there was a lot more gratification, you know.
Mm. And how do you feel your professional work has linked into your hobbies? Because I know that you're very interested in making things on the side and cosplay. So
Yeah, yeah, and like cosplay is has been um like a really great experience for me, because it's like not only do I get to like practice my skills and also build what I want to build, because I mean, as I'm sure you can relate, it's like you get into the industry thinking like, oh, I'm gonna like design and build stuff, and they're like, no, 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 you design or you build. There's no, and it's like, but I want to do both. And so like that's why you do stuff on the side, you do commission works, you do cosplay, and that way you can be strategic as to what skills you want to sharpen. Like I'm learning how to sew. It's not my strong point, but it's like that will help me in my career in the future. But it's also going to help me fabricate the costumes that I want for cosplay. Because that was one of kind of like I did a competition in New York City, and I placed quite high, but I didn't get the main prize. And like I think one of the main reasons because of that was because I didn't have any sewing, and sewing is a very important skill to have in cosplay. So my next costume will incorporate a lot more of that, I think.
yeah, it's great. It's good to
Yeah.
use it as yeah. I think we all like learning new skills, and yeah, it's good. So what's your favorite costume that you've made?
Well, to be honest, I've only actually made one full suit of armor for cosplay at this point, and that was the one I competed in New York with, and it was kind of like I started out and I wanted to make Warhammer 40,000 Orc Mega Armor, so I made a big power claw, and then I realized that it was very heavy and very uncomfortable. So if I were to make an entire suit of mega armor, it would just be a nightmare to move around in. So I kind of scaled it down where I kind of had like medium light armor sort of thing on the rest of my body, and then I ended up having stilts, and it was kind of like a Fallout Wasteland Raider meets Warhammer 40,000 Orcs. Which was fun because again I got to kind of like organically evolve the concept as I went along. Um, I guess one of the nice things about, you know, if you're looking at like steampunk or like wastelanders or anything like that, is the way that they would go about building their armor if they couldn't, like, you know, find a prefabricated suit of armor, is they're taking scraps and kind of cobbling it together and stuff. And so you build it as you go along in a very organic fashion. So it not only is realistic for the way that you would actually build it if you were in that situation, but it's kind of fun because you can kind of like fly by the seat of your pants and be like, oh, like, you know, like I have a gap in my armor between like my belly button and my waistline, like what can I stick in there, and you kind of just figure out, you know, like on the fly how you're going to resolve that, which is nice. But it's that's great for that sort of aesthetic. Whereas if you're doing, you know, again, like Space Elves or Eldar or something like that, where they have a very refined, clean aesthetic and everything interlinks and stuff like that, then you need to plan all that ahead of time and execute your design. You can't really just be like, you know, cobbling it together, because there's going to be a disassociation of aesthetics. I mean, even with the orc armor I'm currently building, the helmet has a lot of 3D curve, or like you know, like three axis curved surfaces and stuff like that. And then I built the breastplate, and it's got maybe a little bit more faceting, and so because there's like flat planes, it clashes with the smooth curves of the helmet, and like it still looks like the same suit of armor, but it's not, it doesn't read as perfectly flowing between the two pieces. And I think that once everything is put together and I kind of like take that kind of like note in my head, and I'm building the gauntlets and every other piece, I can kind of put more of the curves back into that, and it'll all kind of blend. But right now, just with the breastplate and the helmet, there is a disconnect. And like, you know, so that's something that, you know, if you're building, you got to kind of like be aware of that, and like what's your ultimate outcome and how are you going to piece everything together. You know, like, are you going to template everything ahead of time so everything fits, you know? Like one of my pet peeves is the bobblehead look with cosplay. You know, where you want to build a helmet that fits on your head, but if it's too big, you end up looking like a cartoonish bobblehead with like too big of a head, right?
Well, it's even been said about even the original Star Wars. There, a lot of the, especially the TIE fighter helmet and things like that, that they look like children because their heads
Yeah, yeah, out of proportion,
out
right?
of proportion. So it's easily done even for professional, in the real film world. But yeah, it's definitely something for cosplayers to think about as well. Super interesting. Yeah, that's been really great to chat to you, Mike. Thank you very much for
Yeah,
sharing
no
your story
problem.
with us.
Yeah, no, I'm always glad to give back to the community. You know, it's like as creatives, it's like we need to band together and grow together and make each other stronger. Like that's what cosplay in its best form. Like why it's such an amazing thing, because it's like we're, instead of like competing with each other, like we need to share our skills and help each other grow, because like that's how we're really gonna get good and take it to the next level, as opposed to kind of like like hoarding our own specialized skill sets and stuff like that, you know.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, that's what I'm trying to go for with this podcast, is build a community and celebrate the people who putting in so much hard work and yeah, just interesting characters. So thank you very much, Mike.
Yeah, not a problem. Thank you.
Cheers.